Well,
make sure we talk about Backdraft, okay?
Oh, yeah.
I wanted to watch it before we did this. I totally forgot.
Who's in that? Richard Gere?
No.
Backdraft?
Kurt Russell.
Kurt Russell.
Oh, that's a good
William Baldwin, I want to say.
Billy.
Billy?
Willy Billy.
Willy Billy Baldwin.
That's a
Willy Billy Baldwin.
Willy Billy Baldwin. And I remember it being, I mean,
Yeah, it's William Baldwin.
15 years ago, it was pretty fucking intense to watch.
91.
God damn, really?
2 Chicago firefighter
I didn't see it till like 95.
brothers who don't get along have to work together while a dangerous arsonist is on.
De Niro's in this?
Okay, how long does it take you to put aside your differences to deal with a dangerous arsonist?
Right.
Like, is that the first minute?
Yeah.
Hey, I fucking hate you. I hate you too. Wait a
Not the
minute.
situation.
Someone is just burning buildings down with people inside them. This isn't over. Let's go get this guy.
Let's
Also,
let's table this.
that was
Should we call the police?
maybe the police should be involved.
Not the firefighters?
We're just firefighters. We show up we're reactive. We're not proactive.
Like, you don't have a movie about EMTs that go after serial killers.
You don't do it. They come and scrape up bodies.
Doesn't make any sense. The police do that. You just take care of the thing that they did.
Yeah. Backdraft.
Take care of it.
Why are firefighters out there looking for the arsonist?
Well, the problem is you've got Kurt Russell and Billy Baldwin and Robert De Niro. You need someone more like I don't know, John McClane shows up and Rambo. Someone who's taking action.
Those guys,
These guys.
they're behind the scenes players.
It's Captain Ron.
Mhm.
It's Captain Ron and Jack Donaghy's uglier brother. It's just not the right team.
It's not the A squad.
Not the A team.
Fire is really the start of that movie, though.
That's true.
It's pretty spectacular. And fire is the start of this podcast, isn't it?
Isn't it?
Okay, let's do this.
All right. I'm Martin Wallace.
I'm Darren McCarthy,
I'm Dan Fury.
and this is The Fundamentals.
That's right. Fire.
That's
Crazy.
our topic.
Yeah.
That's the topic.
Big one.
Yeah,
Element.
this
Well, back before we knew what we were talking about, we thought it was an element.
a bunch of dummies
Back when we were a bunch of dummies.
Yeah.
grouped some stuff that they could hold and manipulate and move from place to place together.
It made sense.
Made sense.
I mean, you got your air,
Earth,
water,
fire.
fire. Yeah.
Now, a little bit different though on the molecular level.
Although it seems to be the same because you can feel it moving around and
Yeah.
burns you.
Yeah, you don't want to feel it too much.
Yeah. What's the difference?
Well, where the other elements are made up of matter,
Mm-hmm.
fire is actually matter changing shape. It's what happens when matter change shape, and then you get
It's a
what
dance
we know
of
as
matter.
what we know as fire. So what's happening is we have these little compounds, these little elements, molecules,
Mm-hmm.
and they're hanging out in some kind of form, some kind of organic matter like wood, just having a good time in there.
Mm-hmm.
Some kind of heat comes along, right?
Yeah.
Gets them all agitated and dancing. These little molecules just get all, and they break apart after they start moving too fast. And they recombine with some oxygen, right? Fire.
Fire happens.
Yeah. It's
So-
crazy.
Whereas water, earth, and air, which are traditionally that's like the elements, those are molecules existing as molecules. Fire is the rapid change or chemical reaction of one or more molecules with oxygen, and they're thrown into action by a source of heat.
Yeah.
Which I don't know, it's kind of a fun distinction. I hadn't really thought about that.
Makes you really rethink it.
Yeah.
Because when we were talking about this subject to begin with, realized I couldn't accurately describe fire or flame or
Right.
what that physically really was or chemically what was happening. So
Yeah.
The only thing that I knew for sure that oxygen was a huge player in it.
Yeah.
it doesn't always have to be oxygen. That's just, and there's just a lot of oxygen around. So that's primarily the main oxidizer. They even call it an oxidizer because, but other things can be oxidizers. It's just 9 times out of 10, it's oxygen. Like what else is out there?
Yeah.
You know, I'm not a scientist.
On Earth, it's for most events, it's going to be oxygen.
Yeah.
But yeah, I could not explain. I got to the same point with oxygen, and I asked a few people, you know, can you explain what fire is? And everyone kind of got to the same point. Yeah, it's hot.
Yeah.
And then there's oxygen. And if you have oxygen...
Most people I asked didn't even bring up the oxygen point. And it just stumbled around with the heat factor for a while.
Get a lighter. And
Yeah.
There you go. You have your fire. But what's the real story, guys? That's what we're here to learn.
The real story?
Okay. See, this is kind of hard to even to...
Where do you start, you know?
Where do you start?
Typically, we think of, cavemen discovered fire.
So for fire to exist, there's the tetrahedron.
Mm-hmm.
I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Where you need a heat source, a fuel source, and oxygen to be present. And also gravity to some extent.
Mm-hmm.
Gravity does funny things to fire.
It really does. So if you're gonna...
That's something that you really don't even think about.
You know,
duh.
We would never have firsthand experience.
Yeah.
You know, with unless you're in NASA program or something.
We took fire to space, guys. We did it.
Yeah. But in a zero gravity situation, instead of rising, the fire just forms a sphere.
Mm-hmm.
That is so tight.
Yeah. That's a really
It also...
Hadouken.
It smothers itself because it removes the oxygen source. So this is an important thing with the fire triangle, the tetrahedron. Is that right?
Tetrahedron?
Hedron. Doesn't matter. We'll do geometry some other time. In order to extinguish a fire, all you have to do is remove one of the 3 elements: the fuel, the oxidizer, or the heat source. Mm-hmm. And in a zero gravity environment, a fire will naturally do that to itself. It smothers itself because it starts burning and doesn't allow more oxygen in. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of an interesting thing. So it's actually like one of the safer places to have a fire is
on the space station. As terrifying as
I mean, you have other things that will shoot oxygen at it.
Yeah.
And then you have a real tricky situation on your hands. But as long as it's just in space, it's actually way safer.
Yeah.
You know, it's just going to... And it looks cool, too. I mean, you never see fire in a perfect sphere.
It's also,
and it dies out.
Apart from the lack of oxygen, why they say there's no... you see a sci-fi movie and there's a spaceship that blows up and there's flame. Mm-hmm. That's one of the reasons that wouldn't happen in reality. Mm-hmm.
You'd need to have a ton of oxygen.
Yeah, just expelled real quick, burn up like that, and smother itself instantly. If you're in a situation that where gravity is having an effect on Earth within our atmosphere, as something is burning, we see the flames rising.
It's hot air rising.
And then elements of gas for whatever is being burned are being burned off and they're rising up. Mm-hmm. Whereas the heavier element is carbon, things like that, are being held back down and form a char. So as gas is being released from the fuel, rising up, burning, creating a flame. And then the hot air is rising. So
what you see is you have combustion happening, which is the fire itself. And you have either complete combustion or incomplete combustion. And what happens there is in complete combustion, all of the molecules that are separating reform with the oxygen uniformly, and there's nothing left over. It just becomes the new molecules. And then when there's not enough oxygen, there's too many of these molecules to combine, and so those kind of float up, and that's incomplete combustion, and that's where you get things like smoke.
Yeah.
These are the things that
ash,
burn a little bit, but then aren't fully absorbed and just float off. And there's so many little partially burned particles. What we see is dense cloud of black smoke.
And as these elements are heating up and burning and then rising, they emit light. And so this is what we call incandescence. It's basically your incandescent light bulb. It's something that's being heated up and it's emitting light. So that's the flame that we'll see, is these elements being superheated or heated to the point where they will emit light. Mm-hmm. There's also the color spectrum by and large, that will follow like the hottest part of the fire, like the base of the flame will be blue, or like you hear it was white hot.
And white's the hottest.
White's the hottest.
Blue would be
the hot, very hot. And then as you kind of get into yellow, it'll cool
like
down.
Blue, green,
Yeah.
orange.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you look closely, you can even see it when you use a lighter or strike a match. The base of it is always blue because that's where all the complete combustion is happening. That's the hottest part. Yeah. And as it's coming up, it's losing some of that heat. I mean, it's still really hot, but as it's coming out, it's fire.
Yeah.
It's still really hot.
Don't touch it.
That's why it starts getting into that red and orange area, and then eventually you don't even really see it, but you can still feel the heat right above it because it's still there.
So do you know why smoke is often various colors, like gray to black?
Yeah. So that'll depend on whatever chemical, or typically a chemical, I think.
What compounds are in it.
Whatever's in there, if it's not burning up completely, or if it's recombining with other things in the air, they'll create soot, or different color smoke.
Just very dependent on what's being burned.
What's being burned.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Whether it's vegetation or paper. Or it's like paper turns into ash really quickly, and then is so light it starts spreading around. You can see that pretty well. But
yeah, then if you burn like a pile of car tires, you bring a lot of different chemicals that are in there, like different chemical compounds.
Rubber smells so bad when it's being burned.
It's pretty rough.
Yucky.
That's also why when you use a lighter, you never get any smoke that rises off of it. When you use a match, you can get smoke out of it because of the wood. So the fuel in the lighter doesn't have anything to turn into smoke.
Gotcha.
You need to heat another fuel in order to get smoke.
Yeah. One more thing about the gases rising in flame. It's also because they're much hotter. Therefore they're less dense. That's why they move into like a lower pressure atmosphere. That's why they rise into lower pressure. Yeah, just want to touch on that before we move on.
So each of us knows how to make something on fire. And we have a lot of tools at our fingertips to do that. Fire is something we take for granted all the time. But how do we know what the process could have happened for these,
Like the human discovery of fire?
Yeah. What was that process?
It's still up for debate.
I think that's probably impossible. I mean,
to really pinpoint it, I know, but what's the general consensus?
Well, I think if you look at cultures around the world, fire by friction is, depending on the environment, will be a pretty common thing. But that also depends on the type of wood that's available, the density of the wood, how dry it is. Like that wouldn't work necessarily in like a rainforest maybe, or just a place that didn't have a lot of wood in general. And also, I think fuel types would really dictate how you start the fire. Like, so some cultures or areas that there's not a lot of natural kind of readily available fuel sources, like dead trees. There might be animal dung that's dried out and ignited. That won't necessarily burn, but it will smolder. The flashpoint, the point that there's enough heat present to start breaking down the molecules of the fuel source to then kind of self-perpetuate and ignite, might be different in the lowers. That would dictate how people start their fires.
Yeah.
It's so hard to pinpoint exactly when people discovered and started controlling fire.
Or when I think really like when they stopped being terrified of...
That must have been a big jump.
That must have been... That's a huge jump.
I imagine that maybe it was seen before it was...
Oh, certainly.
Yeah, wildfires were rampant and very common. They still are today.
Yeah, and they're a very, very important
Isn't there always like an uncontrollable fire
somewhere in the
burning
world?
Somewhere?
Yeah. I mean, millions of acres of land are burned. Yeah. But this is a very, very important part of any ecosystem because... all the undergrowth, which is there's more relative surface area. So if you think about like a Doug fir, like a redwood, I mean the bark might be 6 to 12 inches thick.
Yeah.
So a fast-moving brush fire that's just burning off all this like kind of dead or maybe even I guess I don't know if you can say malnourished, like stuff that's not getting enough direct sunlight, because they're in this. It just burns out all this stuff. It cleans out the forest floor. All the nutrients, the nitrogen that were released or then trapped in the plants and then released by the fire are now going back into the soil. So there's going to be a whole new kind of fresh start generation of plant life coming up.
And just the opposite will happen too, where the fire clears out the top layer of the trees and allows more sunlight and rainfall to come down and help out those plants that are at the bottom. So if
it's a super hot fire that's going to like completely engulf this forest, you see it's
strangely beautiful to come across a large portion of a forest that has obviously been burned by a large fire, and you just see, these basically tree carcasses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a really good moment driving from Portland to Bend.
That's exactly what I'm thinking of.
Where you turn this corner in the mountains and it's everything's fine. You're just in this pretty forest. Yeah. And you just go along this turn, and in the middle of it, you just hit where the fire stopped.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And all around you is nothing but just burnt, charred old trees. And it's eerie, but it's really cool.
It's really cool.
Yeah.
So I guess going back to how long we've had it's so difficult to pinpoint exactly when it started, because the evidence going back into a fossil record is really, really hard to decipher any kind of meaning out of, because fire has always been around.
Well,
as long as we've been around.
It really depended on enough oxygen being present in the atmosphere, which certainly predates any, human life. And we're talking.
Yeah, I thought this was pretty interesting too, discovering when fire actually showed up.
Yeah, it shows up
on Earth.
There's a fossil record of fire
in the Middle Ordovician period.
Now we're talking
about 470 million years ago. Fire showed up because it was the first time that life had evolved to give plants to emit oxygen. And so prior to that, there's no fire.
Gotcha.
And I never thought about that before until, I just always assumed fire. Like an elemental thing, it's always there. But no, there wouldn't have been wildfires until there was something to burn.
Yeah,
and an oxidizer.
So the fossil record is essentially is plant life that's been turned to coal or the charcoal, I guess, and then I suppose the pressure becomes coal. That was really interesting. I think it's
so it's much more difficult to find out when we figured it out. But
so what you see in a lot of those records is you see evidence of humans there, some kind of area where they were eating. What you see is you'd have animal bones that have tool carvings in them, or eating the meat. And you would find that those bones had been burnt. Mm-hmm. And so then, you have evidence of they were cooked. Well, we really don't, because fire could have come through after.
Yeah.
And no idea. So it's
true.
It might make sense then. So
I think there is kind of a record of 50 to 100,000 years here that human beings have been using fire to cook, and but that's 50,000 years of space.
Yeah, I'm reading that there are people who just say it could have easily been 1 million years ago too.
Yeah,
it just showed up. we weren't writing anything down at that point. We just came across it. And that idea is that maybe a lightning strike inspired somebody to
collect some.
Yeah, that it started a really small fire that they could gather and then move and light other things.
Who knows?
Yeah,
his name was Herbert.
Yeah,
he was a vegan.
Yeah.
Would later go on to invent the wheel. He was a real bright guy.
Bright guy.
He's Herbert.
Prometheus is
special dude.
I looked at its effect on the body for some. I don't know. I think maybe the Tansler episode or something. It's just I don't know. Just
I'm
weird.
curious. So what happens when you get burnt?
Right. So I was looking up the
what's actually happening to you when your body is being burnt?
Something terrifying.
I imagine, because I didn't look into this, but I would assume at this point it's that agitation that's really happening. That's what the burning is.
Yeah, it's kind of the destruction of the cells. Mm-hmm. And if you're talking about, because one thing I guess now that I'm thinking about it is when people say first degree, second degree, third degree.
Oh yeah.
What those different burn levels. And then I thought also something I still haven't looked up is first degree or second degree or third degree murder. I don't know what is worse. Yeah. What's the?
I would assume first degree murder is like the big one.
It's
one. But then I have no idea.
But it's backwards.
Burns is backwards.
Is backwards.
Yeah. So first degree burns, it's the top layer, the top layer of your skin. Like it's a rash, Second degree is the first 3 layers of your skin. And then 3rd degree, you're going kind of all the way to the tissue of your body.
When you see a 3rd degree burn, that's tough. I've seen some people that, had full burns all over their face, and that's just something that I imagine would be really tough to live with because that is not something that looks like anything else, and if it's on your face, it completely changes the way that you look, and you can't help but look at that. Like, I don't want to stare, but wow.
Yeah, it's hard not to in those kinds of situations.
There's also a 4th degree.
Oh no!
I never heard of the 4th degree burn.
I think this might be why. Extends through entire skin and into underlying fat, muscle, and bone. Appearance, black, charred.
You can live through a 4th degree burn?
I imagine you might have to amputate, whatever.
Here's something that's actually this is interesting. So I'm looking at a chart here describing, 1st through 4th degree burns. There's a column here that says sensation. So for 1st degree, it says painful, and it's highlighted. 2nd degree, like superficial, kind of extends into the superficial part of your skin. It says very painful. Now, a deeper 2nd degree, there's a little variation there. It says pressure and discomfort. And then 3rd degree and 4th degree both say painless.
Oh, wow.
What?
I'm wondering if it's because it's so severe.
If it shuts off the nerves, it just burns the nerves straight through. You
burns
can't
it
feel
to hell.
anything.
Yeah.
Sort of for the same reason, like if you get cut with something fine, like really sharp and really fast, you don't feel the cut happen to you right away, or at least you might feel it, but it's not painful. It's just weird, and it isn't until you recognize what's happening.
And the paper cut. I think the worst part of paper cut is you feel it, and then you look, and then it's like a delay. You see blood show up. Yeah. It's like, God.
It's dumb.
And then you just know every time you wash your hands, it's going to suck.
Some of the prognoses here for different burns. I mean, the 1st degree is a bad sunburn. 2nd degree is you might get an infection. The skin's been damaged, but it's not going to be scarred. The worst 2nd degree level, you might have some scars. You might need like a skin graft if it's really bad, or depending where it is. 3rd degree, you're going to scar up. I guess we hear contractures, possibly some amputation. 4th degree, amputation.
Yeah.
Significant functional impairment.
Can't use it.
And in some cases, death.
And probably a lot.
I would say a lot.
One of my first memories, actually, is touching a hot stove and
your brain came online.
Yeah.
That was it. Like,
whoa, I'm alive.
We're not doing that again.
Yeah.
No.
You know what's funny? I
was like 3 years old.
One of my earliest memories is being at a museum with my dad and my brother. I was probably 4. Somewhere my brothers were 2. We were right in that range. And I forget. This is like an old building. And they had a hot water pipe next to a window that had like a ledge. It was a big enough ledge you could sit on. My brother and I were too short, so we had to climb up onto this thing, and we would have looked out. And I forget which one of us did it first. It might have been me, maybe my brother. But one of us grabbed this pipe to help climb up,
boost up,
and went whoa, and then it's like, oh, it's hot.
Like the steam comes out of the ears in the cartoon kind of feeling. Yeah.
Then the other one of us, I forget who it was, went, what's wrong? Is it hot? And grabbed the same pipe. And then my dad, an adult, supervising these children, said, it's not that hot. And then so the 3 of us were just like shaking our hands in a museum. I mean, I was too young to know any swears, but I would have been swearing.
Oh, wow.
I was probably saying like, He-Man or something.
Just whatever.
Yeah.
Skeletal.
Yeah, that's funny. Actually, that's definitely one of my earliest memories.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it's my earliest, but
it's funny because I don't remember anything right before or after. It's just a very short stamp of time. But I remember the way it looked. I remember the kitchen.
That's like an event.
The way my finger looked, and I was looking at it.
Your brain said, you will never forget this.
Yeah, exactly.
You will never do this again.
Do not do that again.
Well, speaking of, like terrible things you can do with fire, what it does to your body.
How sad is that? That's like what I looked up.
Yeah, you have a good story, right?
Yeah.
About burns?
Oh, yeah.
Get to it.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Well, we've used it in war.
Oh, quite a bit.
As long as we've been going to war.
I'm glad you're bringing this up.
Yeah, we had Greek soldiers, the Trojan horse.
Mm-hmm.
They use fire in that. There's a long history of just different methods of throwing fire on your enemies. So I think it's just a funny thing. Like throughout all of human history, once we figured out fire, like cooks food, and it's good, and it's light, and it keeps predators away. And then if you don't like somebody, I'm going to discover a way to put it onto your face.
Yeah.
Like stay out of my home.
I think a classic example is the boiling oil. These attackers attacking a castle and just dumping it's not like it's quite the same thing, but you're utilizing fire to
really... Well, you use it to make it hot, and it's...
Yeah. Or then, the burning...
all bombs, guns, all these things, it's fire-based.
I was just recently listening to another podcast, and they were talking about the moral, ethical justification of using the nuclear weapons in World War II. So the prevailing reason is it saved millions of lives. So 50,000 people died in an instant, and then I forget what the population of Nagasaki was, but I think it was similar, if not a little bit bigger, were just evaporated. But if we hadn't done that, if we had relied on conventional an invasion, it would have been millions of lives, both Japanese and American. So they said it ended the war.
Yeah, much more brutal and face to face.
Yeah, so it was justified that way. But in reality, we were already dropping firebombs, not only on Japan, but also in Germany. The first-hand accounts and descriptions of this, and these are bombs that are incendiary bombs, and you're talking about a culture that at the time, most structures were made of paper, like in
really
wood.
Thin wood.
Yeah, it's going to go. You drop a match, and that's the neighborhood. So these descriptions of the firebombs, it's complete. They'd be trying to run or be in a shelter, but it's so hot, it's so all-encompassing. And one of the examples was in Hamburg that was just burned off the face of the earth.
Dresden's another really good example.
As well. And people would be in these bomb shelters and it'd be getting so hot. I mean, it's becoming an oven at this point. And then they're, just obviously the panic is setting in, and they would open up the doors, and the description is it was opening the portal to hell. Because it's just a wall of actual wall of flame. Yeah. And it's sucking the oxygen out. People are just being
terrified.
Like the air in your body is being sucked out of you because this fire is drawing the oxygen out and being burned. So when they say is that, if you heard that description, would you say, not knowing? I mean, if I said that that's what happened when this place was bombed, would you be able to say, that must have been a nuclear weapon? Is a firebomb any better?
Yeah, it's an interesting point to think. It was terrible. It took a lot of lives instantaneously, whatever. But we, for several years prior, were just destroying everything anyway.
Yeah, Yeah. The nuclear weapon was just a bigger payload, a bigger blast initially.
Well, for as much terrible things that fire can do, it's also pretty much the most beneficial thing we ever discovered. Yeah. Not a single person on the planet that doesn't use it.
In some way.
Yeah, it's...
Well, that's funny. I mean, we're sitting in a lit room. I'm sure that this power, if not directly, at some point, something was burning to get this power to us. And then even if you get down to an off-the-grid situation, they're still using fire directly to heat things.
Have to.
Fairly universally. Have you guys seen the uncontacted tribes and there's still fire there. Kind of necessarily.
And I think they must have branched off
from some
after we had discovered it already, and then everything.
That is crazy to think that there is untouched areas of the world at this point in time,
and we have to
have no idea.
Focus on keeping them that way.
Yeah. Well, they'll die pretty quick.
Yeah.
These poor people have not. Well, yeah, they just have not had any contact with any of the diseases that we would inherently bring.
Wow.
I'm seeing here that the International Energy Agency, which I imagine is a great place to work. That's just it's a mouthful.
Just punching the clock.
They say that nearly 80% of the world's power comes from a source that is fire-based. Yeah. Natural gas,
The
coal.
IEA.
The IEA, the International Energy Agency.
Wow.
Yeah, they probably have a lot of weird paperwork.
Yeah.
A lot of stuff they're keeping track of. Without it, just about nothing would be possible that resembles our modern life, our technological advances,
Very true.
modern medicine, food.
It's also, I think it's strange how even today I do a lot of backpacking, and I think probably annoyingly, every time I'm staring at a campfire, I'll say, look, it's the original TV. And, I'm sure that this is why I don't go backpacking.
The first time it's
with,
funny, I can tell you that much.
That's why I get the...
You go alone now.
Yeah, I go alone. I do go alone, actually.
You still say that joke to
look at
yourself?
I kind of do.
Look at that.
I definitely think it. And that's something I think my dad said, that we have a fireplace in my parents' house. And,
It's fun to watch because it's
great.
always changing.
It's always changing.
No fire is ever exactly the same.
And I think you could totally just it's like a meditative, just zoned out. Although there was one time I was backpacking alone, probably because I was saying stupid stuff like that, staring at the campfire, and stared at the campfire. I started reading Into the Wild.
Oh.
You've got White Fang showing up.
Oh.
And I was alone, and it was like it's just reading the first 20 pages, just these two dudes sitting by a fire being hunted by wolves. And I was just like, I'm just setting the scene right now. This fire is just really tripping me out. And then anytime the stick broke, I'd be like, hello.
Something about like TVs, the computer screens, they all emit like the same frequency or wavelength of light that fire does. And I read somewhere that's why we're so drawn in by them. The same reason when you just stare at a fire, even if nothing's on TV, you get that same kind of feeling from it.
Wow, I didn't see that.
Interesting.
That's crazy.
Yeah, that's why you can just sit and stare at something and just zone out, even if what you're watching isn't entertaining or you're not even paying attention to what's on TV anymore. It's just the light is.
Do we need to go back and revisit
mesmerizing,
Cheers now? Is that why Cheers was... Okay.
It was their idea to do that.
Yeah. Are you guys ready to talk about this woman?
Yes.
I'm ready to hear this story.
Okay, so while we were doing the research for this, this just kind of came up on the news.
It's pretty recent, right?
Yeah, it is. So this woman is at a party, and she's talking to this man. And
That's her first problem right there.
Man, she should have known. So this woman's at this party, talking to this man, and she's by all accounts, gorgeous. So this man's wife is also at the party, and she takes a little bit of an offense here. A little jealousy wells up. So this the wife, Natalie Dmitrovska, goes to the victim, Dana Vulin's house, throws methylated spirits on her face, and lights her on fire.
Good heavens.
Now, she suffered third-degree burns, which is, we've covered,
Painless.
Unfortunately, it was over 2/3 of her body. Oh, and this says actually has endured constant pain. So I'm sure as you're healing, you're going to be in a lot of pain, obviously. Now, she's been wearing basically, I don't know how to describe it apart from like a skin suit. It's like a spandex-y looking something. It's some super form-fitting fabric.
Yeah.
That I imagine, I guess, is just protecting her
From
skin.
like latex kind of thing.
Yeah, I got a picture of it right here.
Oh, that's interesting.
It reminds me of Vanilla Sky.
That's what I think.
When he's wearing that regenerative shield.
Yeah. So she's got that going on.
That poor woman.
It's unbelievable to me that she survived.
Now, you know what happened to the woman who did this? Did she...
Oh, she went straight to jail.
She went away?
Yeah, that was...
Locked up.
Yeah.
On a fit of jealousy.
Well, the woman was a convicted drug user.
That probably didn't help.
That's what happens, okay? That's what happens when you smoke pot.
Don't do the marijuana.
Don't do it. She's describing this ordeal saying, I was pretty much instantly on fire.
Oh, wow.
I was a human fireball.
And you'd have to like smother that to put it out. It'd be like a grease
Yeah.
fire.
Yeah.
I don't think I've heard the term methylated spirits. But this is high ethanol content,
Yeah, it's
like really high proof, I'm assuming.
yeah. You can
Like 151 or
you can
something
buy
like
it. Yeah.
Just get
that. Or is that
hammered.
like the, what do they call it? The Navy strength or something? There's like a higher percentage gin.
Oh, for sailors?
Yeah.
Really got that messed up?
Yeah.
Where does this guy? I've never heard
It's a
that.
specially formulated version.
It's for 3-4 weeks out at sea.
Yeah.
This guy get trashed.
You gotta have maximum.
See, this is the
efficiency.
problem. People join the Navy and they think, "Oh, it was made for me. I can
Yeah.
handle this."
Yeah.
You probably can't. It's denatured alcohol. Actually,
It's what?
It's denatured alcohol.
Mm.
Really.
So you're not supposed to drink this.
You shouldn't.
Okay.
No.
Because the word spirits.
Yeah, like 100% alcohol. Like, I mean, any
Very flammable.
any big box store like,
Yeah.
or hardware store would have this.
Okay.
It's used as a glass cleaner.
I gotcha.
You know, it's certainly not made for human consumption.
Don't drink it
And
unless
actually,
you're us.
this also says it has additives to make it poisonous, extremely
Yeah.
bad tasting, foul smelling, or nauseating to discourage people.
In some cases, it's also dyed.
Died, yeah.
Let's put poison in it because it's already bad for you.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
To discourage any more possible
It could also
drinking.
get you real fucked up, and people will drink it if they could. So let's
Mhm.
make sure that they can't. So how's she doing now?
She's doing okay. She took off the suit.
2 years is a pretty quick recovery time.
Yeah.
Something like
30
Mm-hmm.
months. She was under the skin suit. I don't know. I don't want to call it a skin suit. I don't know what else to call it. The protective
Yeah.
bodysuit.
Pajamas.
Yes. But it's,
In a onesie.
Yeah.
it's a onesie.
It's a full onesie.
It's I don't know. It's kind of incredible to me, like what
Yeah.
this.
Changes you forever.
Yeah.
Skin doesn't grow back if you burn it off.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing too. Is like you couldn't. There's not enough skin to graft.
Yeah.
And you know, like your 2/3 of your skin is gone. Got a little post photo here of her, and I have to say,
Did a pretty good job.
so this is someone who was. If you the listeners want to Google image search, Dana Vulin is Dana Dana, Vulin Vulin, and there's before and afters, and I mean she's gorgeous both before and after. This is someone who's burned, covering 2/3 of her body.
Wow.
Not bad.
That's
crazy.
shocking.
That's
And in a
pretty shocking.
positive way, it's not.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. No,
I'm shocked.
it's unreal.
Yeah.
She's pretty hot.
She's, oh,
Gonna
gee.
say. Hey,
So next
We can edit that out, right?
and Fuego.
so next week, puns.
I
Oh, man.
don't know what that is.
So we know that fire can obviously do a great deal of damage on an individual level. It can
Mhm.
change the whole look and feel and structure of your own personal body.
Mhm.
But obviously, in the annals of our history, there have been many incidences known as the Great Fire.
There's a lot of great
this and
fires.
that have done mass destruction.
Yeah,
Let's talk about some of those.
I think my favorite is the Great Chicago Fire.
mm-hmm.
That's one that most people have heard of.
Yeah, and
But what
it's
really
kind of
happened?
crazy. So, I mean, I had always heard of it. Started by a cow kicking over a lantern,
Oh, man.
you know, which isn't true. No, that's not true. But
Yeah,
that's
that's not true.
one of those.
When
just
was
the way
this?
that story
The
is
20s or
spread.
something?
Oh, it's earlier than that. It's 1800s.
Hmm.
Yeah, 1871, and it was in Chicago. And,
I was
and
out
it,
by 50 years, whatever.
yeah, at that point though, 50 years is pretty much the same time. It wasn't until the 1900s where each decade was different.
Exactly.
I don't know if that's factual or not.
It's neither here nor there.
I'm not a historian, okay? All right, October 10th of 1871 in Chicago. And at this point in time, Chicago is built almost entirely out of wood.
Which is not unusual for the time.
No, and you think, of course, like, well, yeah.
Wood is nice.
Buildings are made out of wood
things
and
out of
whatever.
wood.
But what was kind of shocking to me was so are the sidewalks. The
Boardwalks.
sidewalks were made out of wood.
I mean, the streets aren't paved. You got to get above out of the mud and the trash, and yeah.
Put some
And-
wood down.
what had happened was Chicago at this point was really, really booming and in a way trying to compete with New York as the new budding epicenter of American life and culture. So they were building all these buildings new art styles, bigger, better, grander, but mostly out of wood. And the story goes that this poor Irish family had a barn in the middle of town. This is what Chicago was like back then. Major metropolis, and just has a barn in the middle of it. And this cow at around 9 o'clock at night, while it's being milked for some reason, you milk cows, you don't do it at 9 at night, kicks over a lantern that goes into some straw in the barn, poof, goes up in flames.
It's in the middle of town.
It's in the middle of town. Why it spread so horribly, what went wrong was all the firefighters were alerted immediately, and there's like 185 of them. But this guy named Matthias Schaffer, who is the watchman for Chicago, which I imagine he just like sits in a tall tower and it's like, fire!
No, I don't know what he does.
Yeah, Matthias Schaffer got the response pretty quickly for the fire, and then just gave him the wrong address. And so 185 firefighters, the whole crew goes out immediately on 17 horse-drawn steam engines, right?
What is a horse-drawn?
I don't know. It doesn't even have like a link to look into it. I think it's just made up.
Okay. So on chariots.
These guys rush out to action, so ready to defend their city from fire, and they just go to the wrong place. And by the time they get there, it's just an inferno. It's just gone up, and it's crazy.
Wait, so you said that wasn't true about the cow thing. So what actually happened?
So what happened with that story is it was just sort of a fib made up by a reporter afterwards. It was just a colorful way of explaining what happened because it did start in that barn. But it had some pretty bad ramifications because this Irish woman, Catherine O'Leary, Patrick and Catherine O'Leary own the barn, and it all got pegged onto Catherine, this poor Irish drunk woman.
Why not
idiot?
Patrick?
Nobody cared about Patrick. I think they just wanted to blame it on somebody, blamed it on the woman. Blamed it on the wife. Yeah. It was just a colorful way of explaining the start, right?
Yeah.
That then went on to not only really ruin her reputation, but also led to a lot of like anti-Irish sentiment throughout the whole city. Because a lot of people started feeling like, these drunk poor Irish, it's stupid. It was just all because one of the reporters said this colorful thing, which wasn't true at all. Yeah, and he even said like 3 days later, I just made it up. And it's still,
but people are like, yeah.
It's still how that.
Where's Catherine?
Yeah, but damn that.
Yeah.
It's still how that story is spread. So,
was there an actual confirmed?
No, nobody really knows.
Okay.
There's another story about how a bunch of.
But it did start at that
barn.
Location.
A bunch of like younger like teenagers were hiding in that barn to gamble.
Awesome.
Yeah, and Catherine came in to shoo them away, and when they were running out, they knocked over the lantern, so it's actually these kids' fault. Another thing is that Catherine and Patrick were in bed when the fire started. It couldn't have been them. So all we know is that it started at that barn for sure, because it started there, the firemen were alerted to it, and then it spread, and of course everything's made out of wood.
On fire.
So the fire starts spreading towards the river, where the firefighters are certain that it's going to sort of stop it, and they can just make like a C shape around it and quarantine the thing. But by the time it gets there, it's so hot and the wind is moving so fast that the fire jumps and eats the bridges around it, eats the boats on the river, right, and jumps across the river to the other side.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Because debris is being sort of funneled up into the air by this fire, and then once it gets it gets shot from the wind at the top across the river into these other buildings. It starts fires all over the place. There's nothing you can do. So it's just crazy.
Fire without gravity, or with gravity.
Yeah, it destroyed about 3.5 square miles of Chicago, right? Left more than 100,000 people homeless.
How many people lived in Chicago at the time?
At the time, right?
Yeah, I don't know actually, but yeah, it killed about 300 people.
Damn.
Yeah, it's crazy. And so,
how did they stop it?
It just went out.
They didn't.
They didn't have anything.
Oh my God.
Yeah. But right after that, the city then became like a model for firefighting and fire safety, and that led in a new era because fires are pretty common at this point with cities made out of wood.
Yeah, well, it's probably just as common as it would be today. Maybe a little, I guess, more common, but a much bigger deal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, it goes back to our first episode about the circus.
Yeah.
Fires just seem to be a lot more common in the 1800s.
Yeah, and way more destructive. Way more destructive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Here's a quote about the time. It says, Chicago had a weakness for big things and liked to think that it was outbuilding New York. It did a great deal of commercial advertising in its housetops. The faults of construction as well as of art in its great showy buildings must have been numerous. Their walls were thin and were overweighted with gross and coarse misornamentation. And this led to just this crazy spreading of the fire. So yeah, it went out and they became sort of a model, an icon for fire safety. It was actually a pretty good ending to that story. What I thought was pretty interesting, though, something that I never heard of, because at least I'd heard of the Great Chicago Fire.
Yeah.
And it is kind of funny because even my limited knowledge of it, I had heard that story before of the cow tipping over them. And it's a pretty common pop culture thing. On that same day,
Oh, boy.
the same day, in Peshtigo, Wisconsin, not far away at all,
far.
The worst fire disaster in American history happened.
What?
And nobody gives it any mind because it happened the same day as the Great Chicago
worst.
Fire.
What
The
makes it the
worst.
worst?
It killed 2,500 people.
Okay.
Significantly more.
That's pretty bad.
Yeah. And it's one of the scariest things I've ever heard, right? You go back to the Great Chicago Fire. I mean, like, it's a big fire in an urban area, and that's terrifying.
Chicago.
And people are running around mayhem. 300 people died. And
You got fires.
It's
jumping
awesome.
rivers.
This firestorm started. There was a bunch of small fires clearing forest around the area, right?
Oh, boy.
And a cold front moved in from the west, which would have gone through Chicago too, which has to do with why that fire spread so bad. But it brought strong winds that fanned these little fires out of control, and it turned it into a firestorm. And a firestorm is called nature's nuclear explosion. It's a wall of flame, a mile high, 5 miles wide, traveling 90 to 100 miles an hour, turning sand into glass.
Jeez.
Yeah, it's like a monsoon of fire.
And-
Traveling at the speed of the winds alone are dangerous.
This happened
It's
where
5 miles wide.
For the listeners, my eyes are wide open right now.
this happened where people live. This happened like
By the time it was over, it had consumed an area twice the size of Rhode Island. About 1.5 million acres were burned. 12 communities were destroyed. An accurate death toll has never been determined because
$1.5 million.
Yeah. 1,875 square miles, not 3.3.
Holy shit.
Jesus.
And when we say 2,500 people died,
Yeah.
that's just what we know, because there were whole communities that were destroyed that nobody at all knows who lived there.
Oh,
because none of the records were left, and everybody in the city died. There's no
It just
possible way
wiped
of
out.
knowing who was even there.
What's the name? This is Peshtiga?
Peshtigo, Wisconsin.
Is this still there? Or do people like to say we're not?
Where
No, it's still
Peshtigo
there.
used to be.
There's a town there?
Yeah, it's all still
People
there.
live there right now?
Wow.
They rebuilt it. Yeah. 12 communities were destroyed.
This is America, of course.
350 bodies were buried in a mass grave because so many people had died that no one remained alive could identify them.
Oh.
They didn't even know who was around. So the fire jumped across the Peshtigo River in the same way that it jumped
Really?
in Chicago and burned on both sides of this inlet town. And survivors reported that the firestorm, this already terrifying thing, 5 miles wide, 1 mile high, 100 miles an hour winds.
Can you even picture that?
No, it's well, what makes it even better is that the firestorm, as we now know is scary, generated a thing called a fire whirl, which I'd never heard of before, or a fire tornado.
Wow.
that threw rail cars and houses into the air.
What are you even talking about?
This sounds.
Oh, this is sci-fi. This is a joke. I mean, this
sounds like an extreme straight-to-DVD movie.
Yeah, it's Sharknado, but with fire.
Yeah, with
just
Fire-nado.
sounds like Michael Bay.
Like, this could not happen.
A wall of fire comes at you, and once you're in it, there's tornadoes of fire that
flaming
uproot the
rail
houses.
cars
Yeah.
Jeez,
Just destroying
come on.
12 little towns in the middle of Wisconsin.
Well, wait a minute. If all of these people died, then where's the recount of this story coming from?
Well, not everybody died, but everybody in the 5 mile thing that came at you died.
So people at
saw.
5.1 miles.
Like, look at that
Look
shit.
at
So a lot of the people immerse themselves in the river, right? Or wells.
Yeah.
There's no place else to go.
Yeah.
And you just run into the water and just hide.
Take a chance.
And most of them drowned.
Yeah.
Right. While others just succumbed to hypothermia. Well, so you either burned to death or you froze to death. Right. There was a light, the Green Island light. It was kept lit during the day because there was so much smoke. So you had to have this lighthouse on. During the day, you couldn't see where land was. God. Yeah, the fire was so intense it jumped several miles over the waters of Green Bay and burned parts of the Dora Peninsula. A chapel survived, which I think is pretty interesting. A bunch of nuns and local families went to this local chapel for protection, and they participated in prayers and devotions to the Virgin Mary, and the chapel was surrounded by flames, but it survived.
What?
They considered it a miracle, yeah.
That's the power of the Lord.
Now, this happened on the same day as the Great Chicago Fire.
That's incredible.
Nobody talks about it.
Yeah, how have I never heard of that? Oh, man.
It's like it's a phenomena. Just the fire alone, not the death toll, not anything. How that fire must have been is worth knowing alone.
I've never heard of anything like
fire whirls and firestorms, and
that's like
1,000, almost 2,000 miles.
How often does that happen?
Has that ever happened again?
No.
How? I mean,
not in American history. I mean,
I guess that's got to be like you have
the perfect storm.
The open plains, just grass. This like great tinder.
Yeah, it was this cold front that came in.
Yeah.
And then, of course, as things burn, it only pushes the wind and creates a higher pressure for the winds that are already pretty high. Yeah. So that's how you get... Whew. So there's a theory that the Peshtigo and Chicago fires on the same day was not just a coincidence.
Oh, yeah?
Wait a minute.
Yeah. Because during that same day, there were also fires that occurred in Illinois, Michigan, and other parts of Wisconsin. Just not
quite as intense.
Yeah.
Who made money?
This was first suggested in 1883, back when we had hard science, that these fires were caused by the impact of fragments from a comet.
What?
Because on that day, too, a comet had come down.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
Are you telling me that
talking about like the weirdest day in history, and we've never heard about it?
Have we been talking about the most important day?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Why isn't this taught in school? You brush over the great fires. You get the San Francisco fire, which had nothing at all on this, so I'm not even going to bring it up.
I was going to talk about
the London fire.
I was going to talk about the great
London fire is pretty good too. There's one in Rome.
What about the comet fire?
Let's talk about the comet fire.
So I guess the comet came down, shattered in the atmosphere, separated, and fell all over parts of the upper
when
Midwest.
you think about, when you visualize this mile high, 5 mile wide, that makes a little more sense that it would be an unearthly event.
So it's not impossible, and it does sort of make sense, but it's not super credible because it's never happened before. And when meteorites do make it to the surface of the Earth, they're actually ice cold.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it is possible that
they usually
as it came down, it burned just long enough to start some sparks, but it's really just...
But the wall of fire was a mile high and 5 miles wide, regardless of how it's started.
Yeah, so the idea really is there was a bunch of brush fires outside of this area, and they
low pressure system went up.
Yeah, that's the scientific makes real logical sense. This cold front came in.
I suppose wind
brought it all together. suddenly it was just out of control, and it just went for it because it's going like 90 miles an hour at this point.
I suppose the meteorite is a cool addition for me.
It is.
But whether or not that happened because of a meteorite,
I think it just
wall
goes
of
back
fire.
in the late 1800s. That's how you would have explained it.
Exactly. I mean, who knows?
But it's
the
also just an
exact
interesting coincidence that on that day, not only was there just a bajillion fires all over this area, but a comet also fell to Earth. Nobody talked about that either.
Oh wow. That actually seems like apocalyptic type stuff.
In this little picture of the map here, what's in red is the area that was impacted by the fire in one day.
So that certainly would be the worst.
I've driven back and forth across this country and zigzagged all over.
Yeah.
That is
That's a large
a full
area.
day's worth of driving.
Yeah.
And I mean like a 15-hour day of driving.
I got up into Canada, it looks like.
Wow.
That's why we haven't heard about it.
Yeah, there you go. Well, that's incredible. Let's hear just a little bit about
these other great
London
fires.
fire.
Well,
It's still pretty great.
I think, okay, so like the Chicago fire, there was, I mean,
It had
obviously,
humble beginnings.
obviously the technology's not really there to fight fire. And, I think you can't really fault anyone for that. Similar situation, there's...
When was this one?
1666, is that
classic
true?
one.
So it ran from Sunday the 2nd to Wednesday the 5th of September in 1666. And essentially there's the medieval city of London. So like the part of the city that was encased in this Roman wall, like it was built on this Roman settlement. So the part that was surrounded by this wall just is gone. So the estimate is that 70,000 of that medieval city part's 80,000 people are now homeless.
Jesus.
Yeah.
95%.
Yeah, it's a big old chunk, folks, that just are homeless now. Nothing does not compare at all to this wall of fire. However, one thing I do like is thinking that, okay, so this happened in 1666, and it started in the bakery of Thomas Fariner on Pudding Lane.
On Pudding Lane.
Yeah. Now,
I love that. Just thinking it like this like Beauty and the Beast opening credits kind of thing.
Come on down to Pudding Lane.
Yeah, Pudding Lane, where you get Thomas's great cakes.
And then there's this hulking thing in the darkness. I love that. It's like it's kind of unequivocally this guy's fault.
Well, it's just like Catherine O'Leary.
Yeah, it's like how do we know? It's 1666 and 70,000 out of the 80,000 people are homeless. But someone said, you know who did it, right?
You know.
And everyone's like, yeah, Thomas.
That asshole.
On Pudding Lane.
I hated that guy. He cheated me out of my pies.
Okay, so now here's another thing too. The death toll of the only verified deaths were 6 people.
What?
However, the deaths of the poor and middle class were not recorded.
Yeah, undocumented. Probably fairly large.
And the fire was so hot and burned for so long that anyone that was kind of caught by the fire and died
just get cremated.
Was cremated.
Oh,
so it was just ash. So like there wasn't even a body that you would come through and identify.
Damn.
I really like this too. The major firefighting technique at the time.
Yeah.
Creation of fire breaks.
Fire breaks. This is crazy. So it's like
you would just like create tinder for the fire around the area in hopes that it would just eat that instead.
Out. So like there's a fire over there. So like, and there's a couple houses in between. So you would go demolish a house real quick so that it wouldn't be able to jump.
Yeah.
And I'm sure at the time they're thinking, "Oh, this is a brilliant idea."
Yeah. That's well, I guess you have nothing else you can do.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the fire hook, it's like people like just running up, and there's this emergency happening. And like
just demolishing a house in 1666.
Yeah.
You do it with your hands.
Get your hammers.
They don't have like a wrecking ball, so you can't do that fast.
So. I think we should point out and this goes also for the Chicago fire. We're not laughing at the tragedy or the loss of life, but it's so absurd. I think if you don't, you have to react to just the absurdity. I mean, it's
the imagery that I get is only humorous, unfortunately.
I think
it just is.
I think that's kind of you can't imagine the reality.
It looks
of it.
like
I just kind of imagine like that old black and white footage that seems sped up.
Yeah,
people like scrambling to
see.
Exactly.
I just get like just Disney, a Disney cartoon of this happening where this is the running around and it's terrible, but that's just how I'm imagining it. Also because this process, the fire breaks, was critically delayed.
Because
owing to the indecisiveness of the Lord Mayor of London, Sir Thomas Bloodworth. He had to have been a crazy guy.
Yeah.
Sir Thomas Bloodworth.
So we have the, I guess, nursery rhyme. The London Bridge is falling down.
Yeah.
That's from this fire.
Oh, okay.
Wow. Yeah.
So the London Bridge is the only thing connecting this part of the city, like the medieval part of the city, with the other side of the river. And the bridge, it was inhabited. So there are homes on the bridge. I mean, it's not just like this big stone bridge. I mean, it's like a neighborhood.
Okay.
Going across the river. So when the fire is spreading, essentially it just runs across. And that's where this song, so the bridge ends up catching flame and being destroyed.
Bridges.
Yeah. Although Chicago didn't need a bridge. You used boats.
Well, it had bridges too. There were just boats there that caught on fire while
First.
Yeah, it's terrifying.
Yeah.
London was full of black powder, apparently.
I don't know.
I'm getting into 17th century firefighting right now.
Yeah.
Really great pictures of like how-tos that look like weird fire hooks and these paintings.
Well, before we approach critical mass here, I do want to touch on Backdraft.
We gotta talk about Backdraft.
So what is Backdraft? That is a thing.
Like what?
What is a backdraft?
So backdraft is, as we know, you need oxygen for the fuel once agitated by the heat to jump onto. So what happens when you have a really hot fire, you have a fire that depletes all the oxygen in a confined space, like a room. When you supply more oxygen to that area, the fire is going to jump incredibly quickly to get back onto it. All those molecules are agitated, have nowhere to go, and so they're an explosion, essentially. So when you open up a door or a window or resupply oxygen to a room that doesn't have any, the fire is just going to jump onto it like a bridge, meet in the middle, and then eat it. You know, it's a terrifying thing that happens. You're just standing there right in the middle of it. That's a backdraft.
Scary.
You want to know about the movie?
Yeah.
Backdraft.
I wanted to watch it again before we did it.
We should just watch that tonight. Get that out of the system.
I'm way into that. Yeah.
Kurt Russell's succulent muscles.
Yeah.
Wow.
I heard someone describe Kurt Russell with that one time.
I would too. I love that guy.
Yeah, now that I've heard it, I think I'm going to steal it.
Yeah.
So what have we learned today, guys?
I was happy to learn just a little bit more about the chemical reaction, like what fire is, and
Be able to explain it on a simple molecular level what's going on. I wasn't able to do that.
Why oxygen was important. I didn't understand that. And also, we're talking about the open flame version of fire quite a bit, but there's also like just digestion. Like we're burning things, like burning calories.
Yeah, it's the same process. It's just way slower.
It's a way different thing.
You can't call it fire or flame, but it is the same elements happening.
Interesting.
For me, I was happy to kind of, it made me understand a little bit more just about, I guess I'll never look at like a candle the same way, you know?
Yeah.
It's the fuel source is the wax, and then there's oxygen in the air. It's rising because of low density moving to a lower pressure environment and just burning off gases. And yeah, I think that was really interesting, and certainly some horrifying images and some incredible stories and incredible images.
Yeah, I think naturally we are fascinated by fire, the way that it looks, the way that it moves.
It's crazy how much it's done, because I really did take for granted before this all that it really does. Because before it was like fire. It's like, I use it to light my cigarettes. I use it to start fires. I use it to stay warm and this kind of stuff. Like, I use it for everything. I ride in cars, you know. Everything is based around our ability to control fire. I mean, like all the power that we have, it's just beyond scope how much power we're generating, how much we owe to the simplest chemical reaction. You know, we've taken advantage of one particular chemical reaction to the point that it evolved our species past any species that doesn't understand it. You know, we're able to do...
Well, I think just utilizing heat to cook a wider variety of food.
The nutrients that we get from food once it's been cooked. There's that theory
Next level.
that led to our increase in brain size. And of course, that's debated, but that's something fun to look into. We didn't touch on. But
yeah, I think it's kind of fun to think about.
I would like to touch on real fast, though, before we wrap this up. I think it's really important to realize like what a wonderful time it is that we live in when we have fire available to us at our fingertips in the forms of the lighter and the match. Because it's only been about 200 years since we've been able to do that. And you don't really think about that.
Yeah.
You know, the match seems like a really fundamental thing. Yeah. It's this little wooden thing. But that was one of the trickier things to figure out in the course of chemistry. Yeah. How to get a match to work. And we don't think about that. It's 99 cents for a box of them, you know, and they're the most fundamental thing you can have. You think that must have been around since we figured out fire. Right. You know, but no.
No, it's red phosphorus, which once it begins combusting turns to white phosphorus, which then ignites the wood. I mean, it's a chemistry set.
But it took us 300 years once we had the discovery of phosphorus to figure out how to do that. You think in the London fire in 1666, that was 2 years before we discovered phosphorus. So when we're fighting fire, we really don't know what we're
still discovering.
Fire, I mean, we have it. We can. Before the match, you had to use. We had the flint and steel. Yeah, made sense. But that's like a really hands-on approach to it. It takes a lot of time. Like if you want to start a fire, you have to spend some time with it.
You know, I still use ferrocerium rod.
I mean, it's the most sure way to do it.
The beauty is it works when it's wet.
Yeah.
So it's still like 5,000 degrees of spark. So as long as you can keep your tinder dry, there's a better chance.
And for a long time, we were using just like magnifying glasses, like a burning lens. Oh, yeah. Focused onto tinder, but you could only do it on nice days, you know. But that's how, if you wanted to light anything, you just brought out this little glass and held it for a long time until it started to smoke, and then...
And I think this is something, too, that's throughout history, keeping a fire going. Like, you wouldn't have to light a fire unless you had moved a certain... Like, you kept the same fire going.
And you heated your whole house with it.
There's the fire keeper, you know, someone who's keeping the fire going. And that's a big responsibility for the family, I think. And, you know, today there are people that live kind of a subsistence lifestyle, even maybe up in Alaska, and, you know, you'll light a fire in October, and it's essentially it's the same fire still burning in April. You know, just keep feeding it to heat the house. My grandparents had heated their house with a wood-burning stove for part of the year, at least.
And my parents still do that.
I think that's great.
Yeah, they're out in the country, you know, they got plenty of firewood, and so it's just a part of the ritual. It's just part of the, daily life. You chop the wood, start the fire. It's just like it's kind of magical. You know, like you create all that power with your hands, and it's dangerous too. You just take a lot of that for granted.
Yeah. Speaking of keeping fires going, I've been to John F. Kennedy's grave, the Eternal Flame. Yeah. It's been there for over 50 years.
That's bizarre.
Yeah.
That's a cool thing.
That's very cool. So, fire. Appreciate it. Don't fuck around with it.
Don't play with it.
No. I mean, have a little bit of fun. It's kind of fun, but just be aware. It could really, really do
It can burn you.
Yeah. It could burn a lot of stuff.
Yeah. Also, just don't forget how much we owe to it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's very valuable.
Go camping.
Yeah.
Why don't you get out there? Go camping.
Check that out.
So we didn't really look into the history of the match at all in this podcast, but I would like to tell the listeners and you two little homework. Go look at the history of the match. That was kind of shocking to me how interesting the match was. And unfortunately, this has been a long podcast.
yeah.
We don't really have time to get into it, but really, that was
imagine.
like shocking, like how interesting the history of the match was. There's things like Fosse jaw. I just want to bring this up really fast. When we, as humans, like collectively decided to stop using white phosphorus because it was just killing people, we had to have a convention, right? Where an international convention to say like no more white phosphorus. No, for matches. Because kids would eat it and they just die. Or like if you people that worked in match factories got Fosse jaw, which is like it just like melted your whole face, and it's terrifying. And it wasn't until like 1906 that, like right before the First World War, all the countries got together and they were like, no more white phosphorus ever again.
Guys, stop.
And they held a convention, which we look back on and call the Bern Convention because it was in Bern, Switzerland. And
Not because. Oh, come on.
The convention was called the International Convention Respecting the Prohibition of the Use of White or Yellow Phosphorus in the Manufacture of Matches, or ICRPUWPMM.
That doesn't help.
So we call it the Bern Convention. I just had to throw that in there real fast.
Okay, look that up. You can probably see the history of matches on YouTube. See you
Well, thanks
next
for listening.
video. Until next time,
I'm Martin Wallace.
I'm Darren McCarthy,
I'm Dan Fury.
and this has been The Fundamentals.